friends. This is, I have to read it because I can never remember what it's called. Tuesday at 10, Terrific Teaching Tips and Tricks, episode 4. 4. And it's actually coming to you at 10 because I got my act together this time around, and here we go. Here's what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to talk about the term or the phrase breath support, and 3 reasons it's not my super duper favorite, and 3 things to do or say instead of using breath support. So if you do use the term breath support, great, go ahead. Lots of great singers and lots of great teachers use it all the time and have some lovely success doing so. So, whatever, go ahead. If you've ever come across problems or if you ever have had issues with that term and wondered what else to do, then this is the thing for you. So here we go. I'm just looking over my notes every once in a while because I want to just make sure I get all the stuff in, Also, I get distracted easily, so want to make sure. And of course, this is something that I do get into a little bit more depth in the Vocal Instrument 101 in the online course. So that might be something you'd like to do. All right, so many reasons I'm not super fond of that. I have 2 main reasons. The first is, what does it even mean? Support sounds like something that is like, where I'm lifting something up from underneath, or some kind of like, built up thing that like lifts something. Here's the way that McCoy, in his book, Your Voice, An Inside View, describes breath support, and he's basically quoting McKinney. So McCoy says, the dynamic relationship between the muscles of inspiration and expiration that are used to control pressure in the air supplied to the larynx. So basically, singing is just a controlled exhalation. Yeah, I know. Just think about that for a minute. Singing, really just a controlled exhalation, that's all it is. And breath support can be defined as the dynamic relationship between the muscles of inhalation and the muscles of exhalation, such that we can control the air pressure as we exhale and as it leaves the larynx. Right, so this is a great definition, and this is one that we've used for quite a while. And my 2 problems with this term. Assuming your singer is inhaling well, of course, the exhalation is the issue, right? So controlling the air pressure. So I have 2 issues. 1, dynamic relationship between muscles of inhalation and exhalation. Every single human body is made in a slightly different way. Every single muscle in my body is completely different from your body. The positioning of the muscle, the relative strength of each of these muscles, the relative efficiency of these muscles, how fibrous the muscles are, how dense they are, etc., etc. So there are so many differences, so many individual differences between human beings, that my sensation of the dynamic relationship between the muscles of inhalation and exhalation is going to be quite different from your sensation or your student's sensation, or someone especially who has a completely different body type than you, or maybe is another gender than you are, is going to be, right? It's going to be completely different. So we are always going to be at a loss as to how to really accurately describe this sensation of support, because the muscular structures that are involved with support, the muscles of inhalation and exhalation, are going to feel different. So that's my first issue. My second issue is this: the dynamic relationship that controls pressure in the air. These are all moving words. Do you hear that? The dynamic relationship that controls air pressure as it moves through the glottis. These are all moving words. These are all words that imply movement and buoyancy and availability and access and all of those things. And the word support does not imply any of those things. The word support implies stasis and not moving and gripping and grabbing and locking, and at least to me it does. I don't know, maybe it doesn't to you. To me it does. So no movement, and singing is really movement. Singing is, again, it's a controlled exhalation. It's this movement of air through the movement of vocal folds. It's acoustic energy, it's movement, it's air. Support doesn't have anything to do with any of those things. So those are my reasons. Again, lots of people have super duper successful careers using the concept of breath support in their singing. And lots of teachers are really successful using this concept in their studios, and power to you. However, if you're starting from scratch with a student, as many of us get to in independent studios, if you're starting from scratch with a student, why wouldn't you start with something that is way less confusing? Why wouldn't you start them off with something that's going to be useful to them through their whole career, and they won't have to re-explain or figure it out again every single time they come to a new teacher? Why? Why not? I don't see why you wouldn't start with something that's a lot less confusing, right? Right. Okay. So here's the process that I would love for us to start to think about, if you aren't already, in terms of replacing concept and the terms around breath support in our studios. So the first thing in the process is to figure out, what is it exactly that I'm listening to in this sound that is making me want to ask for more breath support, or that is making me want to help them work on breath support? What am I hearing in the sound? Break that down first. So there are lots of things that make us want to ask a student to work on breath support. For example, if the singer is sort of off the voice, you've heard that expression before, especially if they're moving up into the upper register where the sound gets light. What we're hearing then, likely, generally, is we're hearing that the folds aren't closing with as much intensity or perhaps as much engagement as we would like them to close with. So we're getting a less than optimal acoustic energy. What we really want is we really want the vocal folds to be closing better. That's what we really want. And the reason that we're asking for more support is because generally what helps the vocal folds to close better is better air pressure moving through the vocal folds. So then the folds resist that air pressure a little bit more, and they come together with a little bit better closure. And then we get a more efficient sound wave happening then. So if that's what you're hearing, then what you want to ask for is something different than more support. More support just locks you in. It doesn't necessarily give you more air pressure, right? Okay, say for example, the vibrato is a little bit too fast or it's a little bit too slow. So if the vibrato is a little off, sometimes we ask for more support, more breath support to correct the vibrato. So again, if that's what we're hearing, we have to come back and say, okay, what am I hearing here? I'm hearing that the vibrato is a little off. It's either a little too slow or a little too fast, or a little too wide or not wide enough, or whatever. So I'm going to ask for more support. And also perhaps there might be something funky with the tuning. So those in general might be the three things that we would hear in a singer where we would ask them to have better breath support, right? So they're off the voice. In other words, the voice is a little thin, or it's not quite as full or rich as we know it could be, especially perhaps in the upper range, and perhaps the vibrato's a little wonky, or perhaps they're a little funky with their tuning. So those three issues, break it down. What am I hearing that's making me want to ask for more support? Okay, once you've done that, once you're really clear in your head about what it is that is making you want to ask for more support, then figure out what the solution is to that problem. What's the real solution to this problem? The real solution likely isn't just to add more support. Likely not. Likely the real solution is something like, for example, if we want greater vocal fold closure, then we may need to add more pressure to the airstream so the folds are closing better as they are resisting that pressure, that increased pressure, subglottal air pressure. Bleh. So they might be resisting better, which means that they might get better closure. So maybe with the vibrato, there isn't enough laryngeal stability in the larynx. So maybe we're getting the vibrato going way too fast, or maybe there's too much grip, muscular grip, this way. So we're getting the vibrato moving a little too slowly. So that's the issue. Is breath support going to help that? Likely not. Likely we need better breath energy if the vibrato is too slow, and we may need a little bit more breath pressure to help to stabilize the larynx if the vibrato is too fast. There are other reasons that these things occur, but if we're coming back to breath, those are some of the things that could be the solutions to these problems. The third thing is perhaps if the tuning is trending a little high, the larynx might need a little bit of stabilization, meaning that we need the vocal folds to be able to do their own resistance to the airflow on their own without recruiting any other muscles or without letting those other muscles just go. Yeah, so we need a little bit more stabilization in the larynx so the vocal folds can do their work. Okay. So those are the three things that we're talking about. Recap. First step is to identify what is prompting you to think this person needs more breath support. And then identify what the actual technical physiological issue is, and then figure out what the solution is. And then the third step is to just ask for the solution. Don't ask for the breath support, just ask for the solution. So some of the solutions that might be useful in these situations. So something that is really useful for helping with breath pressure and developing that dynamic relationship. Remember, we talked about that before with the definition, the dynamic relationship between the muscles of inhalation and exhalation. A tool that is very useful for this is using a Theraband. So that Theraband, or those, those stretchy pieces of plastic that we work out with, using that Theraband to have that external resistance just gives us this external picture of what's happening internally in terms of that dynamic relationship between inhalation and exhalation. So it's giving an external sensation for the internal process. So maybe you're singing something like to happen, especially if you're moving up into the upper range. So especially if we need the vocal folds to come together a little bit more strongly in that upper range, and we need the breath pressure to be there to help the vocal folds to do that, this is going to be useful through that. Once this exercise starts to give you the desired result, and once that starts to become part of the singing process, especially in that upper range, once that breath pressure, that balance between the breath pressure and the vocal fold closure is starting to occur regularly, and then you can say, so what do you want to call this? And if they say, this feels like breath support to me, then you go, yeah, nice work. That's breath support for you. Great. Done and done. They could say anything. They could say anything in there. And if they happen to say that this is breath support, totally cool. But if they happen to call it like, this feels like pulling toffee, great. This is your toffee pulley singing, and it's getting it done for you. So then you also say, the next time someone asks for breath support from you, you think, I'm going to pull toffee. That's what you think, right? So long as you understand what the process is, and so long as your singer understands what's happening as well. Take ownership over their instrument and over what's happening in their own instrument, and how to find those efficiencies in creating sound. So the second thing we talked about is greater laryngeal stabilization, especially if we're looking to regulate vibrato. So we want the vocal folds to be able to resist air pressure. It goes through the glottis without recruiting extra muscles or being blown apart. So as that breath pressure is moving through the vocal folds, yes, it's moving through, and the folds are like, yeah, I'm resisting. So if the folds are able to resist on their own without having to recruit any other muscles in there, generally the vibrato is going to slow down a little bit for you, or speed up a little bit with some breath energy work, which we might talk about in a minute. Another way to have that stabilization is to work with SOVTs. I know, they're so like in right now, semi-occluded vocal tract exercises, basically, or straw exercises. So let's just say with the straw, we get the straw in there, and we ask our singers to sing through the straw, not loudly, but just sing through the straw, and notice the sensation, or to imagine the sensation of acoustic energy moving back down the larynx and moving back down the throat. So whether they get the sensation or whether they imagine it doesn't seem to matter. In my experience, it doesn't seem to matter. And we have then the stabilization that comes from having this back movement of the acoustic energy by using a semi-occluded vocal exercise or a straw. You can use other exercises too, but I'm going to talk straws for now. So then once they start to sing this way, not loudly, and they start to feel this kind of stabilization that can come into the larynx from the movement of the acoustic energy back. And also, we get a really efficient movement of the vocal folds, especially at the top of the folds, when we're using straws as well. So we get really nice, efficient movement, and we get this kind of stabilization that comes in. So again, once that starts to kick in, then you can ask, what does that feel like to you? And again, if they say, it feels like I'm opening up a well down, that's what you use. But again, if you have a student who's like, oh, that feels like breath support to me, great, use it, fine, whatever. My big point is, don't impose breath support on your singers. And again, well, we'll get back to that in a minute. Here we go. See what I mean? If I didn't have a script, I would be all over the Nice. I'm already all over the place and I even have a script. Here we go. Number 3, what if what we're asking for is actually more breath energy, say for tuning or for laryngeal stabilization? So this is where I love to use tongue trills, lip trills, sound. These are all semi-occluded vocal tract exercises. I think the tongue trill is perhaps a little bit more useful in terms of imagining breath energy and getting a sensation for breath energy than the straw is for me. Some people would feel differently about that. Straw for me is really great for feeling this release down and this kind of backward acoustic energy. See what works for you, man. Breath energy. So we're asking our singers when they're doing tongue trill exercises to notice and teach the body what the breath energy requirements are for whatever the passage of music it is that they are singing or exercise that they're singing or kind of vocal production that they are attempting to have. So tongue trills, and then of course we ask them to sing using that same energy. And I'll tell you what, breath energy often goes along with a little bit of a narrowing, a required narrowing in the vocal tract, so that's a whole other thing. But just breath folds and the resonator all come together, right? They're all working in tandem, so they all affect each other. So even if I'm talking about just breath out on its own, like just woohoo, we're just talking about breathing right now, the breathing affects the way the vocal folds work, which affects the way the resonator is shaped. They all work together, right? It's just not as simple as like 1, 2, 3, but you know this complex instrument. I was laughing at the idea of me having no script. I know. Me having no script would be like watching Robin Williams try to teach a class. That's what it would be. So many squirrels. Might be entertaining. I don't know what we'd learn. Anyway, once the singer has this expectation of breath energy and is able to find that level of breath energy that's required, then again, you're coming back and saying, so what does that feel like to you? Can you name that sensation so that you can come back to it at any point? And again, if they say that feels like breath support to me, so be it. That's breath support. Fine. But they might say that that just feels like forward sound to me. They might say that. I don't love the term forward placement, but honestly, if that's what it feels like to them, that's what it feels like. We use that term. Fine. Again, so long as the singer understands what they're talking about and they understand the process that's happening there, so that the singers can start to take ownership of their process and understand what they need to do to change their process. All right. So the first step to not using the term breath support quite so often. First step, figure out what it is, just what is happening in the sound that is making you want to say to use more breath support. What is it? What's happening? That's the first step. What is it in the sound? Is the sound too thin? Is the vibrato off? Is the tuning crazy? What's happening in that sound that I want to ask that singer to have better breath support? 2, what is happening physiologically to create that sound that is making me want to ask the singer to have better breath support? 3, what is the solution? How can I fix this physiological issue that is making something happen in the sound that is making me want to ask for more breath support without using the word breath support? Those are the 3 steps. Everybody with me? The 4th step, is name it whatever you need to name it that corresponds with what the student feels is happening. Yeah, you can call it Smarties. I don't care. You can call it whatever you want. Couldn't care less. And you can call it breath support if you want. Call the whole process breath support. I don't care. Call it breath support. Okay. I think I've said enough. So that is my Tuesday at 10 p.m. I actually made it to 10 p.m. today. I'm feeling very proud of myself for that. I don't think any of the other ones have been at 10. Tuesday at 10, terrific teaching tips and tricks, episode 4. 3 things to do instead of saying breath support. You're welcome.